Ms. Robinson, from Chicago, is the president of the Human Rights Campaign and the first Black queer woman to lead the organization.
Thank you for inviting me to submit testimony at this important hearing. On behalf of HRC's more than 3 million members and supporters, I've come here today with a single message. The LGBTQ plus people of the United States are living in a state of emergency. This is not an exaggeration. This is not a dramatization. More than 525 anti-LGBTQ plus bills have been introduced this year in the states. More than 220 of those bills target the transgender community, many targeting children, transgender children. And more than 75 of those anti-LGBTQ plus bills have now become law. This includes laws that ban books and censor curriculum in the classroom. This includes laws that forbid children from being able to safely use the bathroom at school, and laws that criminalize doctors for providing life-saving, gender-affirming health care. The purpose of these laws is to facilitate a rise in political extremism by alienating and isolating LGBTQ plus Americans, and the impact of these laws is truly alarming. There's now more violence against LGBTQ plus Americans than ever before, with mass shootings in our safe spaces, murders of transgender people, and threats from the Proud Boys, neo-Nazis, and other groups the Southern Poverty Law Center has designated as extremists. There is now more anxiety and depression among LGBTQ plus children. Data from our most recent survey of LGBTQ plus teens shows that these laws are making young people feel unsafe and can prevent them from seeing a full future for themselves. There are also more conversations among families about whether the state where they live is safe for their children. A mother of 2 transgender teens who is deciding whether to move from her hometown in Texas told me simply, "We have accepted that this state is not safe. It is like a war zone." In every county you represent, in every county your colleagues represent, you will find parents and children, teachers and nurses, community leaders and small business owners who are afraid that the rise in legislative assaults and the political extremism has put a target on their backs. Such fear has no place in the United States of America. That's why, for the first time in HRC's nearly half-century history, we have declared this state of emergency. We've also issued a guidebook to help LGBTQ plus Americans stay safe as they navigate the new anti-LGBTQ plus laws, and a report that details the impact of these laws for advocates, for policymakers, and for the media. I've submitted both into the record. Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, and members of the committee, we need you to help us answer this state of emergency with a sense of urgency. Today, Senators Merkley, Baldwin, and Booker will introduce the Equality Act, which would make protections for LGBTQ plus Americans consistent and explicit across our nation. It's been nearly a decade since this bill was first introduced, and in that time, LGBTQ plus members of the military have served openly. Marriage equality has been codified in federal law, and more LGBTQ plus members of Congress have been elected than ever before. Furthermore, today, more than 8 in 10 Americans support comprehensive non-discrimination laws for LGBTQ plus people. It is time for Congress to catch up with where our country already is and pass the Equality Act. I want to conclude today by saying that although this is a state of emergency, I believe that we still live in a land of infinite possibility, a nation that prides itself on progress. For every Tennessee, there is a Minnesota which has recently passed a statewide ban on so-called conversion therapy. For every Florida, there is a Michigan which recently became the 22nd state to make LGBTQ plus non-discrimination protections law. For every Texas, there is a Pennsylvania which is on the cusp of becoming the 23rd state to do so. For every Defense of Marriage Act, there is a Respect for Marriage Act. And for every extremist, there are many, many more Americans who support LGBTQ plus rights. Our nation is greater than all of this hate, and we must take action now to end this emergency and secure equality for every American, without exception.
Ms. Robinson, do you agree with Ms. Gaines that there's a difference between women and men?
If the question is about trans women,
I'm just asking, is there a difference between women and men?
what I can say here is that the NCAA has rules in place. They've had rules in place for the last decade, and when this competition happened,
I'm going to try again.
the rules were clear.
Do you believe there's a difference between women and men? It's a yes-no question. Do you believe there's a difference?
Oh, I think that we're talking about this case with the NCAA.
No, I'm asking a question. Do you believe there's a difference between women and men? Most people could answer this very simply. I'm curious if you're willing to do so.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just putting it into the context context of the
Is that a yes?
conversation that we're having. I think that there are definitions related to sex,
Is
but
that
I
a
also
yes?
think
So I'm
that when
trying to
we're-
get a yes or no. I'm not trying to get a speech.
Oh,
Is there a difference between women and men?
I think that there are definitions for biological sex,
Okay, so you're
which
not
is
answering
different
that.
than
Let me ask
gender.
you this question then. Why do women's sports exist? If you can't define a difference between women and men, why not abolish women's sports and just tell little girls to swim with little boys and see who wins?
Oh, I'm simply saying that that sex is
My
different
question,
than gender.
why
and I do believe
why
that
do
women's sports have a great
exist?
value. I mean, Senator, I'll tell you right
Ms.
now.
Robinson, please answer the question I'm asking you.
Absolutely.
Why do women's sports exist?
I think that there are so many positive benefits to sports.
But
I mean,
why have a
we've talked
separate
about it here
category for
today.
women? If there's no difference between women and men, why to have women's sports?
I'm saying that there's a difference between sex and gender, and that the NCAA has rules in place, which they have for the last decade.
Mr. Chairman,
which
I
determine
would
that
like to enter into
related
the
to
record an
participation.
article from Duke Law called Comparing Athletic Performances for the Best Elite Women to Boys and Men. And it goes through examining in 2017 the top records for women in the world in various track and field events. So, for example, in the 100-meter, the top record for women in the world was 10.71 seconds. Now, that record for the number one woman in the world in 2017 was, in the year 2017, broken by 124 boys under 18. In that same year, the record for the number one competing woman in the 100-meter dash in the world was broken by a total of 2,474 men. If the radical Democrat agenda to destroy girls' sports and women's sports succeeds, little girls will not have a chance to compete.
I want to follow up by trying to understand your answer to one of Senator Cruz's questions. And this is really a question, not a suggestion. Do I understand your position to be that there are two sexes, but there can be more than two genders?
I wouldn't even say two, and we've got Dr. Lopez here as well, but there's also the definition of intersex. I think that often in these conversations we're conflating sex and gender, and I do want to affirm here that trans women are women. That is their gender.
Okay, but I'm trying to understand. Do you make a distinction between sex and gender?
Yes, sir.
Okay, explain that. Do you think there are more than two sexes?
I believe that there's a definition for intersex as well that I want to acknowledge. But sex is assigned
so
at birth.
I'm just trying to understand. I'm thoroughly confused. So you're born, I'm talking about biology, male, female, and what else?
I believe that intersex is also acknowledged.
Intersex.
But again, I'm not a doctor here. What I can
And
say
what does intersex mean?
is that there's a difference between sex and gender. And I think in these conversations, we're conflating the two.
Well, but I want to start with sex, okay? There's male, there's female. When a baby's born, before the baby has had time to even have a sense of self, there's male, female, and intersex. There's a third sex.
I believe that is true, but I would defer to Dr. Lopez as I'm not a physician.
Okay. And how many genders are there?
I think the gender is expansive, and the definitions are always growing. Today I can tell you,
More
I talk
than
to young
five?
people
More
that
than-
talk about non-binary as
More than five?
I think that gender is not a binary, is what I'm trying
But
to say.
are there more than five genders? I'm just trying to understand. Are there more than five genders?
Well, I mean, I think that there was a time where women wearing pants didn't feel like it was appropriate for their gender, and yet I'm wearing pants today.
If
I
you
think
could
that there are
just
ways
answer
that
my
we
question.
express our
Are there
gender
more
that
than
are
five
expansive.
genders? Are there more than five?
I wouldn't subject myself to naming how many genders there are, but what I can say is
there
that
an
gender is a
infinite number?
reflection. Excuse me?
There's an infinite number of genders?
I think depending on your culture, there are a lot of different genders that exist. And I can also say that it's a term that's evolving. If you look at young people today, they really don't lean into the binary of only woman and man. So I think that it's incumbent upon us not to legislate on this, but create space for them to explore what their identities are, what their gender identities are.
Let's get back to athletics. I think I understand what you're saying. There are three sexes, male, female, and intersex.
I believe that to be true, but again, I'm not a physician.
And
so
there are an infinite number of genders, because gender is a mental state.
Gender is about expression, and I think that there are a variety of ways that you can express your gender.
Okay, so there's infinite number. All right, let's go back to the biology. Male, female, boy, girl, okay? Biologically, do males have an advantage over females biologically in sports?
Again, I'm not a physician, and I can't speak to that.
What's your real-world experience?
It depends. I mean, there are some people who are born male that I'm faster than if I were to sprint against them, and some that I'm not. Some males that are taller than some women, and some that are shorter.
You don't believe that a biological male has a physical advantage in sports over a biological female?
Not as a definitive statement.
Give me an example. Well, no, I don't think. How many female members of the NBA do you see?
Well, I can say that, there's been this news article about men that think that they could beat Serena Williams in tennis, right? That they think that they could actually score a point on her. And it's just not the case. She is stronger than that.
What's your experience, Ben? Male, female?
Both Serena and Venus lost to the 203rd ranked male tennis player, which they're phenoms for women. My experience, my husband, he swam at University of Kentucky as well. In terms of accolades and in terms of national ranking, I was a much better swimmer than him. He could kick my butt any day of the week without trying.
Okay. I just think, Ms. Robinson, I'm trying to understand where you're coming from. I think you lose a lot of credibility when you don't concede that a biological male has physical advantages over a biological female. I mean, I just think that's a proven fact, and you really hurt your credibility. I understand you want the world to be a better place. I do too, and I don't think people ought to be discriminated against because of an immutable characteristic. I don't. And I think that I think everybody ought to be free to be themselves. And what you do in your bedroom or what I do in my bedroom with a consenting adult is nobody's business. But if what I do in my bedroom with a consenting adult, if I decide I want to tell somebody's child about it, then other people have rights too. And I think parents have rights. And I think biological females have rights to be able to compete fairly in sport, in sports. So I really think you hurt your credibility when you refuse to acknowledge that biological males have an advantage over biological females. It kind of makes me wonder about all your testimony. Thank you, Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Kennedy. I'm sorry, go ahead.
What I'm trying to say is that there is not a definitive advantage in all cases. Sir, I don't know if you believe that you could beat Serena Williams in tennis, but I probably think that that's not the case. There are not all cases where all men are physically superior to all women. And at the end of the day, in this conversation, we're not talking about that. We're talking about trans women who are, in fact, women, who deserve to play in a gender that matches their sports, who deserve all the benefits that Ms. Gaines is talking about. And as a cisgender black woman, I can say definitively that my womanhood is not threatened by a transgender person asserting hers as well.
Ms. Robinson, these state laws that you referenced regarding transgender, do you think they're driven by hate, ignorance? What's causing this?
I mean, we know that the people behind these bills are part of a well-funded opposition groups. Organizations like the Alliance to Defend Freedom are a part of that.
Do you think it's driven by hate?
I think it's driven by a well-funded group of opposition.
I didn't ask you where they get the money. I asked you their motivations.
I think it's driven by power. I think that there is a move right now to control people and our bodies for the sake of power. I don't think it's about
Just
people.
for power, right?
Excuse
You don't
me?
think these are hateful people that are doing this?
I think that this is about power, but I do think that as the bills are moving forward, they are creating a culture of hate. And I have to say again that every time we see the introduction of these bills, they are accompanied with violent online campaigns that call my community groomers and pedophiles.
Ms. Robinson, do 80% of Americans support biological males competing in women's athletics?
I can say more than 70% of Americans believe that the
No, it's-
rash of attacks on
No,
trans
it's a
sports
really
is the wrong political
simple
priority.
question. Do 80% of Americans support biological males participating in female sports?
I mean, I can't verify that, but what I can
Well,
say
I
is
can
that
tell you it's not even close. That there's nothing wrong with you if you have a problem with Miss Gaines feeling cheated. There's nothing wrong with you if you have a problem with Miss Gaines feeling uncomfortable in a locker room. There's nothing wrong with you. Now, we'll sort this out as a nation, but this idea that something's wrong with her because she feels cheated is absurd. You have every right to feel that way. And I imagine a lot of young ladies do feel uncomfortable being in a locker room under the situation you described.